So I just finished Disquiet by Christopher Ruocchio, the 6th book in the Sun Eater series, and I want to do a spoiler-free review for all of you, even if you haven't started the series yet, because I just did a series review of the first 5 books. However, I decided to do that before reading this one, and now that I've read it, I have a lot more to add. So again, I'm going to keep the first part of this video spoiler-free and talk in generalities without spoiling anything. If you're partway through the series or haven't started yet, you can definitely keep watching, and I will give you clear warning when I go into any spoilers so you can skip off this video if you're not caught up. But I have thoughts. It possibly reframes my entire thoughts in this series. Might be the best book so far, and some of the things I said in my initial video might be a little bit wrong based off of what the author did here. All that being said, let's get started. So before we get too far in, just to give you a quick synopsis in case you're not familiar with the series and you missed my previous review, this series follows a man named Hadrian. This is the first book here, Empire of Silence. In the first book, the initial setup is that we followed him in a great privileged position, and something happens and he falls from grace, and he has to really scrap and try to survive and get back into a stable place in his life. However, the story is told in a perspective where it's being told from the future into the past. So we know that the character has undergone a great path and a great character arc to become what is known as a Sun Eater. He did this terrible act or fantastic act, depending on who you're talking to, and we get to find out why he did what he did. And so in a way, it's an interesting series because of the fact that the ending is already somewhat spoiled, literally from the first pages of the first book. And then it spans 7 large books. There is 1 more book to go, and the series, I understand, is well on its way to being completed. This author is very consistent at putting out books. So I know I had a few people mention in my previous video they were scared to start the series and not have it be done. This is the case where I can say very confidently that the series will be completed, and because the books are so long, it doesn't hurt to start reading them now because you're going to take a while to probably get caught up before that final release date. Anyway, so what I went into with this book is the fact that I liked the earlier books in the series, but unlike other readers and other reviewers that you've heard talk about this book in this series, I wasn't entirely in love with it. None of the books have been 5 stars for me. Instead, I appreciate things the books are doing, but also see flaws, things that just are not to my taste. And so I want to give more of a balanced perspective and help people decide for themselves if the series is worth picking up. Now, I'm happy to say that Disquiet Gods, in my opinion, is the best book in the series yet, and I loved it a lot. In some ways, I wish I could recommend people jumping into the series about now, because I think a lot of my criticisms I gave in my first review really get ironed out here. So first and foremost, while this is sci-fantasy, it does feel much more like a space opera at this point. There are big stakes, there are big baddies. The world and the galaxy around Hadrian is vast. He has traveled, he has moved, he has met people, and it doesn't feel so close-knit as it did in the first book where he spent a majority of time on this one planet with all the gladiator fights. Instead, we got some really big stakes happening. And for me, I love to see the growth of the character. I feel like he's really grown to be more interesting. I called him, I believe, a bit of a Mary Sue in my previous video. And I do think that he is a flatter character. I don't think he is the best character I've ever seen written. But at this point, when I've spent this much time with the character, even myself, I do find myself caring for him and what happens surrounding him. And that, I think, is the best part of this book, is that it really establishes some long-term connections with other characters. And unlike in the first book, there was kind of some love interest and things like that. But at this point, there's actually characters that stick around for a long portion of time. Whether they are good guys or bad guys, they just have a relationship, for lack of a better word, with our main character. And I just cared more deeply what they were doing, if something was going to happen to them, because of the fact that there was more foundation. At this point in the series, I feel like the author is really rewarding readers who have stuck around, and we're getting to see the long-term benefits, the part that I was waiting for. And as well, with this book, it has the benefit that it's so close to the end. So again, we know generally the events that are going to happen in book 7. And in this one, we are so close to that the stakes are so big, and some of the biggest climaxes that I actually thought might be in book 7 are actually being revealed and talked about here. So for me, this book doesn't suffer from being a middle book syndrome. It doesn't feel like it's just bridging the way to the end, but very much feels like the pre-conclusion. And perhaps this book was actually meant to be part of the finale. I know there was some moving around of the final volumes just in terms of publication, the paper shortage and all that fun stuff with switching publishers, but this one feels big in scope. It feels rewarding to read. I've heard other people say that it's a bit bloated, that's a bit long. I looked at some other written reviews that said it needed more editing down. While I felt that way about some of the earlier books, This one gripped me the way through. I don't know what they're talking about because for me, everything was advancing the plot or advancing the characters and had very purposeful reasons for being there. So there was no sections for me that I thought, oh, why are we spending time here? Why are we talking to this person? The author did have the editorial obligation of catching up readers that perhaps didn't read the books back to back, but for me, I felt like he did it as functionally as possible and moved on quickly to the good parts, and there was a lot of good parts in this one. Now I'm going to mention a few things without getting into true spoilers, so feel free to keep listening here. I thought the author did some interesting things discussing around religion. I know of another series, The Lightbringer by Brent Weeks, which delves into religion and kind of deals with some similar themes or attempts to address them in similar ways. And that series, or particularly the last book, is hugely criticizing what it tries to do. And instead, I think this series does a good job of avoiding jumping the shark and weaving in some thematic ideas around religion that aren't heavy-handed, that I think are more what the readers wanted from Brent Weeks' books. As well, the author plays around with the discussion of life and death and dying and what comes afterwards. And I think the author did some really interesting things that really made me rethink some of my criticisms and conversations I've had around the series before. I can't dive deeper without, again, going into spoiler territory, but I think this author is really doing some interesting things on a philosophical layer. I think that there is a lot to read. If you're someone who just enjoys a book with a good plot, I think that it is there on a surface level, but if you're someone who wants to go a level deeper, I'm happy that that level is there. Often I criticize modern space opera of being very surface level and not having a lot of meat underneath. And this series, it took a while for me to really get invested in it, but you can see me honestly here. I'm invested now. I want that final book and I really want to see how it all wraps up. And that ties into my last spoiler-free point, is the fact that we are so close to the ending. I am nervous and curious about what the final book is going to do. And I would love for you all to speculate down below as long as you're careful with spoilers. But essentially, I think that this book in some ways might be the peak of the series, because in a lot of ways we've been told what is going to happen in the end. And so I don't know if the final book is going to be a bit predictable. Will the author be able to surprise us when they've told us where it's going? And some of the things, again, that I thought would be revealed in book 7 got revealed early in my mind. So very much, don't get me wrong, I'm excited to read it. I'm looking forward to it quite a bit. But I actually don't know if the author is going to be able to hit the same peak as he did in this book, because he kind of has to wrap it all up and wrap it up in a way that we already know is coming, which I think is one of the most challenging things to do with these type of narratives. Don't get me wrong, I think this author can pull it off. I believe in them. I want to see that happen, but I think that's challenging to do right. I think there's a lot of ways to do it wrong, and I'd love to know down below what you think the author needs to do to really nail the ending. Now, I do want to briefly say a few things that might be considered spoilers, so if you haven't caught up in the series, I do wish you well. I will be giving you a warning as soon as I go into spoilers. So if you haven't yet, please consider liking this video, dropping a comment, even if just a little emoji like a sun eater. You could have like a picture of someone eating and then a picture of a sun. That would be cool. And it just lets YouTube know that you enjoyed this video, even if you're checking off a little bit early. And so if that all sounds good, I'm gonna get you spoilers here in a second. 3, 2, 1, go. So where to begin? First off, we have Kern's reveal, and I'll admit it did take me by surprise, but I wasn't reading this one overly critically in terms of trying to predict everything that was going to happen, so that was just an interesting surprise. I like him as a character. I think he creates a good balance to Hadrian, which is what I think of as missing in some of the earlier entries, is not having the complexity always of having these characters with a lot of weight and moral confusion and murkiness all around them, and so having characters that bring the darkness, while Hadrian in my mind is a little bit of a straight up noble. He always ends his books warning that things might be too dark or if we can't forgive his decisions, but I feel like he's a pretty easily likable good guy. And so admittedly, I kind of like guys that are going to be a little bit off the beaten path. Probably the biggest thing I want to mention, of course, is the reveal or having the conversation around the supposed death of Hadrian. I don't know what words I'm supposed to use to describe this, because he went through a death, but he's still alive, he doesn't sleep, and it's the whole thing where I feel like the author was perhaps watching my YouTube series review, which I'm sure he wasn't, but it's the idea that I felt like he was trying to address the point I kind of pointed out, the fact that when you have a series that is written in this narrative way, it's hard because as the reader, you know the character is going to be safe, and it's hard to actually have real consequences when you know that they're all fine in the end. So this was actually a bit of a surprise for me. I think the author did a good job of trying to trip us up and say, well, he's alive in a way, but this is his life or experience now. I, for whatever reason, found it really haunting how they described that he doesn't sleep anymore. I found that to be kind of an interesting angle. And then you have the whole scene with like Cassandra, which I actually found to be very emotionally pulling, where she was like, "You're dead, I don't believe you," and all of that. So at the time, I really enjoyed those moments, those scenes, but then looking back as I record this video now, I'll be honest that I feel like there isn't as much weight to them as I would have liked, because as you kept reading, or I kept reading throughout the book, I really was questioning what was the larger purpose. Did it actually change anything? And the more that I read, the more that I felt like those scenes could have been taken out and the reader would have been none the wiser as to something being different almost, which I don't love. So I'm a little bit critical of it, but was it really exciting to read at the time and seeing kind of, you know, like the story evolve? Yes, but I'd love other opinions down below because I'm a little bit on the fence on all this. But the interesting thing that I think comes out of that conversation is the question of what does death and dying and immortality mean in a future with this kind of technology? And I think that it really does blur the lines, and we really see these characters like spanning long lifespans and just being in a future and kind of seeing how that changes our vision of humanity. And one thing I want to do, which I never do in these type of videos, is actually read out a quote that I love towards the end of the book. So this is definitely spoilers here, but I think it's just too beautiful. And this says, forgive me, I'm not a good person to read out loud, but pain teaches mercy, I said. You suffer so that you understand suffering, so that you do not inflict it without need. Pain makes us human, teaches us to be human. And I just think that it was a really meaningful part to the story because of the fact that it really highlights the fact that through pain and suffering is often how we grow as humans. And of course, for us as the reader, really, I think this part is added in there to explain why we as the reader needed to read everything that came before and give importance to parts like at the beginning with Empire's Silence. Why we had to read all that just to get to the good stuff as I'm talking about here. Because in my mind, I would just have been happy to read these end parts, but the point I think the author is trying to make is, of course, that we grow as humans, but from a more narrative perspective, kind of as an author giving a wink, it's the idea that the weight of the story right now, the consequences and all of that wouldn't mean anything if we hadn't journeyed with Hadrian for so long. And I do think the author actually did a really good job of establishing that. It is true, I would have had a fun time reading these last few books if they were just a little trilogy of the last couple. But realistically, after spending that long with the character, this ending that is coming feels so much more earned, so much more important, and makes me much more excited because I feel like I've been working along with the author. Don't get me wrong, he's the one writing the book, but I have spent my time, I have devoted a lot of time and energy to reading these books and in times rereading them. And so when we actually get to the end and we get to see what will come after all that pain, that is what I want to know, is who is Hadrian at the end of all this? Who is he going to be at the end when he is a Sun Eater? And what is truly left of him at the point that he is telling this story. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think of this book if you've read it, or has my general and spoiler-free section helped to sway your opinion about reading through the series if you're not caught up yet? And if you would like to discuss it further down below, please leave a comment. But if you're talking spoilers, make sure to leave a big spoiler warning at the top, maybe leave a few spaces underneath so that people who are looking at this video and haven't read Disquiet Gods won't be spoiled for those important plot points. And I'd love to know if you want to see more videos like this. I'm playing around again more with standalone video content on particular books that I think will generate a lot of good discussion here. So if you enjoyed this content, please let me know. You can drop an emoticon down below, show me a sun and an eater, and we'll know what you mean. You can also give me a big thumbs up, hit that little notification bell, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye-bye.